We're going to start talking about patterns and mechanisms in evolution. So some things that we need to talk about are things like camouflage and that actually help. These would be our adaptations that give organisms a better chance to survive. So camouflage is obviously one of those. It allows them to be invisible to predators. Mimicry is another one. So if you were to take a look at these two snakes, they look very similar, but one is harmless and one is venomous. One is the king snake and the other is the coral snake. Now, if you look at those two, can you tell just by looking which one is the venomous snake and which one is harmless? This is mimicry. So when we have an organism who resembles another organism so that it's confusing which one might be harmful and which one is harmless, this is mimicry. So the coral snake is your venomous snake and the king snake is the one that is non-venomous. Another idea that we need to discuss is genetic drift. And this is a mechanism of evolution that doesn't work with adaptations. Basically, it's kind of random and it has nothing to do with the fittest surviving. It's just the ones that are lucky enough to survive. And this can also make up, a genetic part of the population because some of it is random. Sometimes just lucky ones survive, and it has nothing to do with being better suited to the environment. When we talk about species, populations of the same species living in the area in different locations tend to evolve differently. Even if they were once part of the same species, because they end up in two different locations, they tend to evolve differently because the geographic locations that they inhabit are now different and they start to evolve differently. And over time, they can become so different that what was one species can ultimately end up being two different species and they can no longer breed with one another. That idea is called reproductive isolation. Coevolution is where we have two species that have a relationship, and their relationship is so close that they tend to evolve together. And this would be an example like with the monarch butterflies. It starts off with the caterpillars, and they eat the milkweed plants, and those milkweed plants produce a toxic chemical, and it absorbs into the caterpillar's body when they eat that. So now this becomes their defense against predators. This is coevolution. Convergent evolution is where unrelated species evolve similar traits even though they live in completely different parts of the world. So if you look here, you can see that we have species of animals that are Australian marsupials versus some of our different mammals. And when you look, they're very similar to each other, even though they developed in different parts of the world. Now we're going to start to talk a little bit more about humans' evolution. So we call this section Fossil Man's Family Album. So we're going to go back and take a look at some of the caveman's, quote unquote, ancestors. So what is a primate? Well, you're a primate, but so are some other animals. A primate is a mammal that has relatively long fingers, toes, with nails instead of claws, arms that can rotate at the shoulder joint, a strong clavicle. They have binocular vision, which means that they can perceive things 3D, and they receive an image from both eyes. And they also have a very well-developed brain. So when we look at the evolution of primates, humans are related to the primates. Our closest relative is the chimpanzees and the gorillas. We share a large similarity with our DNA with chimpanzees and gorillas. So we are related in some way. What this tells us by looking at our DNA and things like that is that we at some point in history shared a common ancestor. Evolution does not say that we were once apes, once a chimpanzee or a gorilla, and we turned into humans. What evolution states is that at one point, humans and the other primates shared a common ancestor, and we began to evolve one way, and they began to evolve a different way. Lemurs and lories are one group of our primates, and they look very much like typical monkeys. Your tarsiers and arthropods are another group of primates, and they are more human-like primates. This group includes monkeys, great apes, and humans. Now, what we know is that these groups separated about 45 million years ago. So, as the continents moved, they started to evolve differently. Your great apes, also called hominoids, include gibbons, orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, and humans. And if we look at the skeletons of these, it's very easy to see when we compare those that the structures are very similar. And DNA is actually confirmed that humans, their closest relatives, are the chimpanzees. Our DNA is very similar. So between 6 and 7 million years ago, we had this split where we had a common ancestor with these chimpanzees, and we began to evolve one way and they began to evolve another way. Again, closest species, if we look, that is where we branch. At some point, we shared a common ancestor. Hominoids evolved the ability to walk upright. They evolved grasping thumbs, large brains. Their neck, spinal cord, hip bones, and legs of the early hominoids changed shape so that it would allow later species to walk upright and not walk on all fours. This is called being bipedal. Bipedal is walking on 2 feet. Bi means two, pedal, P-E-D, means foot. So bipedal means walking on 2 feet. Hominoids' hands also evolved that opposable thumb. So when you take your thumb, you can touch your thumb to all of your fingertips. This enabled us to be able to use tools. They also evolved a much bigger brain, and this developed a much bigger thinking part, or the cerebrum part of the brain.